Levi here again with Hog the Web to help answer the question, do you own your website? And more importantly, why that question is really important when you're working with web service providers. First of all, I wanted to just share a few horror stories that we've come across. So this is actually something that comes up fairly often when we're doing our web design and development work with clients. All too often, what happens is some previous web service provider, maybe it's a developer or a designer or a paid ad specialist, they basically take ownership of certain aspects of a company's web presence, and then when the relationship goes sour, they're not willing to just hand over the keys. And this has created some major problems and stress. And in one case, we actually had to rebuild a company's entire website because the old developer wouldn't just give us access to the website so that we can make a copy of it. Now, that's not always ill intentions. In one case, it was a graphic designer who recently started doing web design, and they didn't have a good understanding of how to set up web hosting servers, so they were putting all their different clients' websites on the same shared server. So they couldn't grant you access to one company's site without granting you access to all these other companies. One of our clients hired a company to do paid ads through Google Ads. And this digital marketing company, they created their own sort of custom dashboard to present the ad results and information to the client. And that's all well and good, except that they refused to give the client direct access to the Google Ads account where they were running their ads. So, that definitely sent off some big red flags when I heard about that, because clearly it seemed like they might be using their own dashboard to manipulate the data. And anyways, the client should always have complete access and control over, all the different web properties. This is our philosophy anyways at Hog the Web. We're kind of just like managers. We're like property managers. So you have the keys, you, the client, have the keys, and you just give us a temporary key so we can go in and make changes and tweak it and manage it. But ultimately, you're the owner, and that's how it should be. Please don't take any of this advice as legal advice. I'm not a legal professional here, so talk to your legal counsel if you have any detailed questions. But I'm just going to share my understanding based on all these different components that go into a website and a web presence. So another horror story from a client was when one of the previous developers had actually purchased their domain for them under that web developer's own personal account. And so because that person maybe moved on to something else, it was really difficult and tedious to do the domain transfer so that the client had ownership of that domain. So anyways, these are all just red flags that we look out for, and why we at Hog the Web are really looking out for our clients' best interests, whether or not they decide to continue working with us. We want to make sure that we're not holding them hostage in any kind of way, although most of our clients do choose to keep working with us for years, but not because we force them to. All right, so like I said, a web presence is made up of many different components. So let's start breaking that down really quick and look at some of the details. First of all is your domain, like mycompany.com, right? Then you have your hosting. So that's the actual server that's holding your website, that anyone that's visiting your site is connecting to that, and it's serving up the data, the content of your website to every person who visits. Then you have your content management system, or CMS. The most common example is WordPress. And you can kind of think about this sort of like the operating system of your website. One of the reasons why we also recommend WordPress is because it's so easy to transfer. Some web design companies, they have their own proprietary content management system that they've custom coded for their clients. While it might create a very nice website, the problem is that there's no way to transfer that. If the relationship sours for some reason, there's no way to transfer that to another company. Some other company's not going to be able to maintain or manage this completely proprietary website, and they'll have to basically build it from scratch. But that's not the case with WordPress, because WordPress is so universal and so flexible. Okay, so then add-ons. So these are just little chunks of software that add features. The common ones are like pop-up plugins to add a pop-up functionality, or maybe to integrate your mailing list. Then there's custom code. So this is not always part of every website, but sometimes a client might want a very unique particular effect. Let me show you an example actually. So for instance, on this website we built for Imhoff painting, and most of what we did here didn't require any custom code. And that's a good thing, because it means that it's easy to maintain. But certain very kind of unique effects, like this radiating play button here, and the scrolling icon there, those weren't like built-in aspects. So it's just a small piece of custom code that we came up with. Then the design. So that's going to be, the entire layout of what you're looking at here, the fonts, the button styles, the dividers, all these sort of graphical elements. All of that is part of the web design, and that's exactly what we do when we design a website, is we come up with a very cohesive and an appealing look. Then you have the content. So that's the actual words here, or the video that plays there, or these images. Now, getting beyond the website, you've got your social profile. So there's, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and all those. But there's also directories like Google My Business and Yahoo and other profile sites. And finally, you have your analytics data. So Google Analytics is the most common one, but there's other ones like Hotjar that basically collect all the analytics data from your website or other web profiles. And that data is usually held on third-party servers. It's not built into the website itself. Okay, so now that we have just an understanding of all the different pieces and components, now let's talk about who owns what, right? First of all, here are the things that you can't really own as a business owner yourself, but you should have control over. So first of all, your domain, because the domain registrar actually owns the domain, and you just pay a registration fee to them yearly. Second of all is your web hosting server. Now, some companies do own their own web hosting server and have a computer sitting in a closet somewhere, but for most small businesses and even medium-sized businesses, that's not necessary. They just rent web server space from a web hosting company such as SiteGround or GoDaddy or WP Engine or other ones like this. All right, next we have the content management system, like I mentioned, WordPress and the plugins and themes. So that software is owned by the developers, and they just usually give you a license to use it. Sometimes it's an open source license, and other times it's more limited, and sometimes it's a paid license. And then also similarly with your social media profiles and your analytics data, all of that is technically owned by the company. It's owned by Facebook or owned by Google, but they're just giving you access to use it. But still, you should always have control over those things. Now, what you should own is anything that's created custom for you, as a work for hire. So, for example, the actual design of your website, the content on your website, so typically you would provide the content of the website to a web designer. That would be the text and the images and maybe videos, as well as your logo and things like that. All of that, you should already have ownership of. And of course, any little custom code snippets that are written specifically for your project or for your website, that ownership would also be transferred to you. Hopefully that answers your question of who owns your website, and more importantly, why it's important to own it, and especially to have the keys over all the different components that make up your web presence. Well, thank you for tuning in today. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to Hog the Web. We're always here to help and lend our expertise. Take care.